The shadows stretched long across the weathered floorboards of St. George's train depot, as Bonnie Taylor clutched her threadbare carpetbag, the last passenger remaining from the afternoon train. Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, yet here she sat, her honey-colored hair falling loose from pins that had held fast during the 3-day journey from Boston. The final whistle had sounded hours ago, and still, no one had come to meet her. Bonnie glanced again at the crumpled letter in her gloved hand. Her sister's handwriting promised someone would be waiting, but as dusk settled over the small frontier town of St. George, that promise seemed as hollow as the abandoned depot. Outside, the Wyoming wind moaned through the eaves, carrying the scent of sage and coming rain. "Miss," the voice startled her. Framed in the doorway stood a man whose silhouette spoke of hard days in the saddle. "Depot's closing. Been watching you sit here since the train pulled out." As he stepped into the lantern light, Bonnie saw a face weathered by sun and wind, clear blue eyes that assessed her without judgment, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to silence than speech. Dust coated his denim trousers and leather chaps, and the Stetson he removed revealed dark hair with a slight curl. "I'm waiting for someone," Bonnie replied, straightening her spine against the hard bench. "My sister, Catherine. She lives at Willow Creek Ranch." The man's expression shifted slightly. "Kate Taylor's your sister." When Bonnie nodded, something like sympathy crossed his features. "Willow Creek's nearly 20 miles out. Nobody's coming from there tonight." Panic fluttered in Bonnie's chest. "But she wrote, Willow Creek had trouble last week. Creek flooded, took out the bridge." He shifted his weight, hat still in hand. "I'm Ethan Novak. I ride for the Double Cross neighboring spread to your sisters." "Bonnie Taylor," she said, rising to her feet as propriety demanded despite the exhaustion tugging at her bones. "Are you certain no one is coming?" Ethan nodded, his gaze assessing the small woman before him. She wasn't dressed for Wyoming, too many layers, too fine a fabric, boots too delicate for the terrain. Yet there was something in the set of her chin that suggested more steel than silk. "I can take you to town," he offered. "There's a decent hotel, and tomorrow I'll see you get to your sister's." Bonnie hesitated, weighing limited options. A hotel room meant depleting her meager savings, but what choice did she have? "Thank you, Mr. Novak, but I couldn't impose. You'll see home before the stars do," he said suddenly, decision made. "If we leave now, we can make Willow Creek by midnight. Road's rough but passable if you don't mind riding double." "Ride? On a horse?" Bonnie glanced down at her traveling dress, the impracticality of it suddenly absurd. A smile ghosted across Ethan's face. "Unless you prefer to sprout wings, miss." Despite her situation, Bonnie felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "I left my wings in Boston, I'm afraid. Then it'll have to be horseback." He reached for her carpetbag. "Is this all you have?" "2 trunks," she admitted. "They're in the baggage car," Ethan frowned. "We'll have to send for them. Horse can't carry all that and us too." The station master emerged from his office, keys jangling. "Closing up, folks. Miss, your sister send word about them trunks." "No, I'll vouch for her," Ethan interrupted. "Miss Taylor's sister had trouble out at Willow Creek. I'm taking her there now." "Can you hold her trunks till we send a wagon?" The older man nodded. 3 days, then I start charging storage." Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the Wyoming sky. Ethan led her to where a sturdy chestnut gelding stood patiently tied to the hitching post. "This is Buck," Ethan said, stroking the horse's neck. "He's solid. Won't mind carrying double." Bonnie eyed the animal with trepidation. "I haven't ridden since I was a child and never like." She gestured vaguely at the saddle. "You'll ride in front of me," Ethan explained, stowing her carpetbag in a saddlebag. "I'll keep you secure." The impropriety of such an arrangement wasn't lost on Bonnie, but neither was the reality of her situation. Night was falling in an unfamiliar land, and this stranger represented her only connection to her sister. "Very well, Mr. Novak." Ethan helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her to the saddle. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her with the ease of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Hold the horn," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. The warmth of him at her back was both reassuring and unsettling as Buck moved forward with a gentle lurch. They rode in silence through the small town of St. George, past the general store with its windows already dark, the saloon spilling light and piano music onto the street, the church standing sentinel at the edge of town. Then they were on the open road, the town falling away behind them as the vast Wyoming landscape opened up beneath a canopy of emerging stars. "What brought you to Wyoming Territory, Miss Taylor?" Ethan asked after they'd settled into a steady rhythm. Bonnie considered how much to reveal to this stranger. "My sister wrote that she needed help. Her husband died last winter." "James was a good man," Ethan said quietly. "Fever took him fast. You knew him." "Everyone knows everyone out here." "Your sister's been running that ranch alone since January. Doing a fine job, but it's too much for one person." The night grew deeper around them as they rode, the moon rising to cast silver light across the sagebrush plains. Bonnie felt herself relaxing incrementally against Ethan's chest, her body swaying with the horse's motion. "Tell me about Willow Creek," she said, fighting exhaustion. "Good water, decent grazing, about 50 head of cattle, some horses. Small operation, but the land's prime." There was respect in his voice. "Your sister's got grit staying on after James passed. Most widows would have sold out." "Catherine was always stubborn," Bonnie said, smiling faintly. "Even as girls in Boston." "Boston," Ethan repeated, as if the word belonged to another world. "What did you leave behind there?" The question was too direct, too personal, yet something about the vast night sky and this man's solid presence made honesty seem the only reasonable response. "Nothing that matters now," she replied. "I taught at a girls' school. My position became untenable." Ethan didn't press, and Bonnie was grateful. The scandal that had forced her departure, refusing the headmaster's improper advances, then being accused of impropriety herself, was too raw, too humiliating to share. They crossed a shallow creek, water splashing around Buck's fetlocks. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. "Are there many women in St. George?" Bonnie asked, changing the subject. "Some. Wives, mostly. A few working girls at the saloon." Ethan shifted in the saddle. "Territory's still raw. Takes a certain kind of woman to make a life here." "And what kind is that? The kind who doesn't break when the wind blows hard." There was a smile in his voice. "Your sister's that kind. We'll see about you." Rather than take offense, Bonnie found herself nodding. "I suppose we will." As midnight approached, they crested a small rise and Ethan pointed to distant lights nestled in a valley. Willow Creek. Relief flooded through Bonnie. Her sister. A real bed. The end of this strange, intimate journey with a man who was still a stranger, yet somehow no longer felt like one. The ranch house was small but solidly built, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. As they approached, a dog began barking and the front door swung open, spilling lamplight into the yard. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" Her voice was clear and strong. "It's Ethan Novak, Kate," he called. "I've brought your sister from the depot." The rifle lowered immediately. "Bonnie, my God!" Ethan helped Bonnie dismount, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. As she stumbled toward the porch, Catherine rushed down the steps, enveloping her in an embrace that smelled of wood smoke and home. "I'm so sorry," Catherine was saying. "The bridge, we couldn't get to town. I've been sick with worry thinking of you waiting." "It's all right," Bonnie assured her, returning the embrace. "Mr. Novak was kind enough to bring me." Catherine turned to Ethan, who stood holding Buck's reins. "You rode all this way in the dark." "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded, hat back in place. "Miss Taylor has trunks at the depot. I told them you'd send a wagon. Of course. Come inside, both of you. I've stew keeping warm." Ethan shook his head. "Best get back. Foreman doesn't take kindly to hands who disappear after sundown." "Nonsense. It's past midnight and Double Cross is another hour's ride. Your boss won't begrudge you shelter after bringing my sister all this way." Catherine's tone brooked no argument, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. "Much obliged." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable. A fire cracked in the stone hearth, and kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over well-worn furniture. Bonnie sank gratefully into a chair at the kitchen table while Catherine ladled thick beef stew into bowls. "How was your journey?" Catherine asked, setting a bowl before her sister. "Long," Bonnie admitted, suddenly ravenous, "but the countryside is beautiful." "Wait till you see it in daylight," Ethan said, accepting his own bowl with a nod of thanks. "Wyoming has a way of getting into your blood." They ate in companionable silence, the day's fatigue settling heavy on Bonnie's shoulders. She fought to keep her eyes open, not wanting to appear rude, but Catherine noticed. "You're dead on your feet," she said gently. "I've made up the spare room. We can talk properly in the morning." Bonnie nodded gratefully. "Thank you for coming for me, Mr. Novak," she said, rising. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Something warm flickered in Ethan's eyes. "My pleasure, Miss Taylor. Welcome to Wyoming." As Bonnie followed her sister to the small but clean bedroom, she heard Catherine say, "The barn loft has fresh hay, Ethan. I've left blankets up there." The last thing Bonnie remembered before sleep claimed her was the distant sound of Buck's wicker and the soft murmur of voices on the porch, her sister and the cowboy, who had brought her home beneath the stars. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and sunlight streaming through curtainless windows. For a moment, Bonnie was disoriented, the simple room unfamiliar after years in her narrow Boston quarters. Then memory returned: the train, the depot, the long ride through darkness with a stranger who had shown unexpected kindness. She rose and dressed quickly in yesterday's rumpled traveling clothes, wishing for her trunks. Outside the window, she could see a small vegetable garden, a barn, and beyond, rolling grassland stretching toward distant mountains. The vastness of it stole her breath. In the kitchen, Catherine was already at work, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. Her sister looked both familiar and changed, her face more weathered than Bonnie remembered, her hands roughened by work, but her eyes still bright with the same determination they'd shared as girls. "You're up," Catherine exclaimed. "I expected you to sleep till noon after that journey." "Old habits," Bonnie replied, embracing her sister. "The school bell rang at 6 every morning for 8 years. Catherine poured her coffee. "Well, here the roosters are our bells, and they're not always so punctual. Ethan's already gone, by the way, left at first light." Disappointment flickered unexpectedly through Bonnie. "I wanted to thank him properly." "You'll see him again," Catherine said with a knowing smile. "Double-cross hands often ride this way. Besides, I've invited him for Sunday dinner. It's the least we can do." Over breakfast, Catherine explained the ranch's situation. James had left her with a mortgage, 50 head of cattle, 6 horses, and endless work. The spring flooding had damaged fences and drowned 3 calves. She managed with occasional help from neighboring ranchers, but it wasn't sustainable. "I need you, Bonnie," she admitted. "Not just for company, but for real work. It won't be like Boston." "I didn't come expecting parlor games and tea dances," Bonnie replied firmly. "I came to help, and I will." Catherine studied her sister's face. "What really happened at that school?" "Your letters were vague." Bonnie set down her coffee cup. If she couldn't be honest with her sister, who could she trust? She explained about Headmaster Porter's advances, her refusal, the rumors he'd spread to discredit her, and finally her dismissal. "The blackguard," Catherine exclaimed. "You should have shot him." Despite everything, Bonnie laughed. "You've become quite the Westerner, haven't you?" Catherine's expression softened. "I've found freedom here, Bonnie. Yes, the work is harder, the comforts fewer, but I answer to no one but myself after James died." She paused. "I could have gone back east, found another husband, lived a respectable life. But I chose this instead." Looking at her sister's face, alight with conviction despite the loss and hardship she'd endured, Bonnie felt something shift within her. Perhaps Wyoming held the same promise of freedom for her, a place where the whispers of Boston couldn't reach. "Show me what needs doing," she said, rising from the table. "I'm ready to begin." The next days passed in a blur of new experiences. Bonnie's trunks arrived, brought by a neighbor with a wagon, but her fine Boston dresses remained packed away. Instead, Catherine provided more practical clothing, sturdy skirts, plain blouses, and a pair of men's trousers for riding that scandalized and liberated Bonnie in equal measure. She learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, to milk the cow without getting kicked, to churn butter until her arms ached. The garden needed constant attention, and Catherine taught her to identify the vegetables among the ever-present weeds. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted but somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. On her fourth day at Willow Creek, Catherine announced it was time Bonnie learned to ride. "You can't depend on someone else to carry you everywhere," she said, leading Bonnie to the corral where a gentle bay mare grazed. "This is Penny. She's patient enough for a beginner." The side saddle from Catherine's Boston days was retrieved from the barn loft, dusted off, and placed on Penny's back. Bonnie approached nervously, remembering childhood pony rides in the Boston Common. "She can sense your fear," Catherine advised. "Breathe deep and speak softly." By sunset, Bonnie had mastered walking and a gentle trot around the corral. Her thighs ached, and she knew she'd be sore tomorrow, but pride warmed her when Catherine nodded approval. "You'll be herding cattle by summer's end," her sister predicted. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains, Bonnie asked about Ethan Novak. "How long has he worked at the Double Cross?" Catherine gave her a sidelong glance. 4 years or so. Came from Nebraska, I think. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's well regarded." "Honest, hardworking, and unmarried?" The question slipped out before Bonnie could stop it. "Very," Catherine replied with a small smile. "Though half the single women in the county have tried to change that. He's not one for socials or town dances." "I was merely curious," Bonnie said primly. "Of course," Catherine agreed, still smiling. "Completely natural to be curious about the man who carried you 20 miles through the dark." Bonnie felt her cheeks warm. "He didn't carry me. We rode together. Same difference out here." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Be careful with your heart, Bonnie. Wyoming men aren't like Boston gentlemen. They're rougher, more direct, and ranch hands rarely settle in one place long." "I have no designs on Mr. Novak or any man," Bonnie insisted. "I came here to start fresh, not to find a husband." Catherine nodded, but her eyes remained knowing. "Just remember, out here, people depend on each other. It creates bonds that can feel like more than they are." Sunday arrived bright and clear. Bonnie spent extra time on her appearance, selecting a blue dress that matched her eyes and arranging her hair more carefully than she had all week. When Catherine raised an eyebrow, Bonnie muttered something about respecting the Sabbath. They attended the small church in St. George, where Bonnie was introduced to neighbors from miles around. The service was simple but heartfelt, the congregation a mix of weathered ranchers, shopkeepers, and a handful of women who eyed the new arrival with undisguised curiosity. Afterward, as they rode home in Catherine's wagon, her sister explained the complex web of relationships that bound the scattered ranches together. Double Cross is owned by the Hendersons. They have 3,000 acres and over 500 head. Old man Henderson's getting on in years, and his son Marcus manages most everything now. And Ethan, what's his position there? Ramrod, second to the foreman, has a way with horses that even Marcus respects. Catherine flicked the reins gently. He's coming up in the world, Ethan is. Saving to buy his own spread someday, from what I hear. Back at Willow Creek, they set about preparing Sunday dinner. Bonnie discovered that the cooking skills demanded by Wyoming ranch life were considerably different from the ornamental accomplishments taught to Boston ladies. Catherine patiently corrected her as she struggled with the wood-burning stove and the proper seasoning of the rabbit stew. Just past noon, they heard hoofbeats in the yard. Bonnie smoothed her skirts and touched her hair before catching herself with a silent admonishment. She was not some silly girl primping for a beau. Ethan dismounted in a fluid motion, looking different than he had on their nighttime journey. His clothes, while still work-worn, were clean, his dark hair damp from washing. He carried his hat in one hand and a small package in the other. "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted them, climbing the porch steps. "Hope I'm not too early." "Right on time," Catherine assured him. "Dinner's nearly ready." He nodded, then held out the package to Bonnie. "Thought you might like this, Miss Taylor." Surprised, Bonnie unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a book, a well-thumbed copy of Thoreau's Walden. "I remembered you mentioned teaching," Ethan explained, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Books are scarce out here, but I thought." "It's perfect," Bonnie said sincerely, running her fingers over the familiar title. "Thank you." His smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines around his eyes. "My pleasure." Dinner was simple but abundant: rabbit stew, fresh bread, and dried apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed more easily than Bonnie expected. Ethan spoke of ranch matters with Catherine, asking about her cattle and offering advice on a fence that needed replacing. To Bonnie's surprise, he was well-read despite his lack of formal education, and they discovered a shared appreciation for Thoreau and Emerson. "How are you finding Wyoming, Miss Taylor?" he asked as they lingered over coffee. "Challenging," Bonnie admitted. "Everything is bigger here: the sky, the mountains, the work. But there's something honest about it all." Ethan nodded. "That's it exactly. No pretense. The land doesn't care who your family is or how fine your clothes are. It only respects honest work and good judgment." "A rather democratic philosophy, Mr. Novak. Out here we can't afford otherwise." His eyes held hers. "Are you planning to stay then?" "I am," Bonnie replied, the certainty of it surprising her. "This is my home now." Something in Ethan's expression shifted, a subtle warming that Catherine didn't miss. She rose, gathering dishes. "Ethan, would you mind looking at that loose board on the barn door? Been meaning to fix it all week." "Happy to," he agreed. Following Catherine's lead and giving Bonnie space to clear the table through the window, she watched them cross the yard, heads bent in conversation. There was an ease between them that spoke of friendship and mutual respect. Whatever they discussed, it ended with Catherine patting Ethan's arm and him nodding solemnly before they parted. Catherine heading to the chicken coop while Ethan disappeared into the barn. Bonnie had just finished washing the dishes when a shadow fell across the doorway. Ethan stood there, hat in hand again. "Your sister mentioned you're learning to ride," he said. "I was wondering if you'd like some proper lessons. I break horses for double-cross. I could show you a thing or two that might help." The offer was practical, nothing more, yet Bonnie felt her heart quicken. "That's very kind. I wouldn't want to impose on your free time." "No imposition. I come this way Sundays anyway," he hesitated. "And maybe you could help me with something in return." "My reading's passable, but my writing needs work. Thought maybe a school teacher might trade riding lessons for writing ones." The request touched her. How many cowboys would admit such a need, let alone seek help? "I'd be happy to," she said. "Though I warn you, I'm a demanding teacher." His smile reached his eyes this time. "And I'm a demanding riding instructor. We'll be well matched." The next Sunday, Ethan arrived promptly at 10, leading a second horse beside Buck. "This is Daisy," he introduced the gentle-eyed sorrel mare. "Steadier than Penny and used to a proper saddle, not that side saddle contraption." "A proper saddle," Bonnie echoed, eyeing the western saddle with its high pommel. "You'll ride astride," Ethan stated matter-of-factly. "Safer, especially if Daisy decides to run." Catherine, watching from the porch with undisguised amusement, called out, "I told you, Bonnie, Wyoming has different rules." The impropriety of it, a lady riding astride like a man, would have been unthinkable in Boston. But here, with miles of open country before her and not a neighbor in sight, Bonnie found herself nodding. "Very well, Mr. Novak. Show me how it's done." The lesson began with mounting and basic posture. Ethan was patient but exacting, correcting the placement of her feet in the stirrups and the way she held the reins. His hands were calloused but gentle when he adjusted her position, and Bonnie found herself hyper-aware of each brief contact. "You're stiff as a fence post," he observed. "Horse can feel your tension. Try to move with her, not against her." By the end of 2 hours, Bonnie had progressed from a walk to a trot, learning to post to avoid the jarring bounce. Her legs trembled with effort, but exhilaration coursed through her as Ethan finally nodded approval. "Not bad for a city girl," he conceded. "You've got a natural seat once you stop fighting it." Back at the house, Catherine had prepared a cold lunch. After they'd eaten, Ethan and Bonnie settled at the kitchen table for his writing lesson. His handwriting was labored but legible, and he approached the task with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. "What do you need writing for?" Bonnie asked as he copied sentences she'd prepared. "Seems most ranch work wouldn't require much." Ethan's pen paused. "Man needs to express himself clearly if he wants to get anywhere in life. Can't always depend on others to do your writing for you. A wise perspective." Bonnie corrected his grip on the pen. "Your letters slant too much. Try holding it like this." Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. Ethan's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them before Catherine's footsteps on the porch broke the moment. As the weeks passed, these Sunday exchanges became a cherished ritual. Bonnie progressed from trotting to cantering, discovering a freedom in riding she'd never imagined possible. Ethan's writing improved steadily, his natural intelligence making up for his limited formal education. July brought scorching heat that baked the land golden brown. Catherine's garden required constant watering, and the creek that gave the ranch its name dwindled to a trickle. Bonnie's skin tanned despite her bonnets, and her hands grew calloused from ranch work. Letters from Boston went unanswered as her old life receded like a distant dream. One particularly hot Sunday, after their usual lessons, Ethan suggested riding to a swimming hole he knew in the foothills. "Best cold water in the county," he promised, "and there's shade." Catherine begged off, claiming chores, but her knowing smile as she waved them away suggested she had other motivations for staying behind. They rode side by side now, Bonnie confident enough on Daisy to manage without constant supervision. The easy silence between them felt comfortable, broken occasionally by Ethan pointing out landmarks or naming wildflowers that somehow survived the summer heat. The swimming hole was everything he'd promised, a deep pool fed by a spring, shaded by cottonwoods that rustled in the slight breeze. They unsaddled the horses, letting them drink and graze nearby. "It's beautiful," Bonnie said, sitting on a fallen log and dipping her fingers in the cool water. "Found it my first summer at Double Cross," Ethan replied, settling beside her. "Been coming here ever since when the heat gets too much." Propriety prevented actual swimming, Bonnie in her riding skirt and blouse, Ethan in his work clothes, but they removed boots and stockings, dangling their feet in the water like children. "Tell me about Nebraska," Bonnie requested, curious about his life before Wyoming. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Not much to tell. Father had a small farm, failed in the drought of '67. He died soon after, and Mother followed within a year. "I'm sorry," Bonnie said softly. "Were there siblings?" "A brother. Went to California during the gold rush. Haven't heard from him in years." He shrugged, but Bonnie sensed the old wound beneath his casual tone. "What about you? Miss Boston yet?" "Not the way I expected to," she admitted. "I miss libraries and concerts, certain comforts, but not the constraints. The endless rules about what a lady can and cannot do, who she can speak to, how she must dress, what opinions she's allowed to express." Bonnie's voice grew passionate. "Here I can ride astride, work alongside my sister, speak my mind without fear of being labeled improper." Ethan studied her face. "You've changed since that night at the depot." "Have I? You were so proper then, so careful. Now there's a freedom about you." His eyes held admiration. "It suits you." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Wyoming suits me, I think." "And does Wyoming's company suit you as well?" The question was carefully casual, but his eyes were intent. Bonnie met his gaze steadily. "Some company more than others." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief but deliberate. "We should head back," he said quietly, "before your sister sends a search party." As they rode home through the golden afternoon light, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building since that first night beneath the stars. August brought the roundup, when neighboring ranches combined forces to gather cattle for market. Willow Creek's small herd would join Double Cross and other spreads for the drive to Cheyenne. For 2 weeks, Catherine and Bonnie worked from dawn till dusk preparing supplies for the men who would take their cattle to market. "Will you go on the drive?" Bonnie asked Ethan during his last Sunday visit before roundup began. He nodded, helping her adjust Daisy's saddle. "Marcus wants me leading one of the crews. We'll be gone 3 weeks at least." 3 weeks. The thought created a hollow feeling in Bonnie's chest. Their Sundays had become the anchor of her week, something she looked forward to with increasing anticipation. "Be careful," she said, unable to express the deeper concern behind the simple words. Ethan's hand covered hers on the saddle horn. "I will. Been doing this a long time." "I know, but—" She stopped, uncertain how to continue without revealing too much of her heart. His expression softened. "I'll come back, Bonnie." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, quick, almost chaste, but unmistakably intentional. "That's to remember me by," he said quietly, then turned to mount Buck before she could see the flush rising in her face. The days of the cattle drive stretched endlessly. Bonnie threw herself into ranch work, helping Catherine repair fences, preserve garden vegetables, and prepare for the coming winter. At night, she read Thoreau by lamplight, finding new meaning in his words about simplicity and purpose. Letters arrived from Boston, her former colleague Miss Winter's warning that Headmaster Porter was spreading vicious rumors about Bonnie's flight west to escape scandal. The news should have upset her, but Bonnie found herself strangely unmoved. Boston's opinion mattered less with each passing day. "You're becoming a true Westerner," Catherine observed one evening as they sat mending on the porch. "I hardly recognize my proper Boston sister." "Is that good or bad?" Bonnie asked, looking up from her darning. "Good," Catherine said firmly. "You're stronger here, more yourself." She paused, needle poised. "And happier, I think, especially on Sundays." Bonnie concentrated on her mending. "Mr. Novak has been kind to both of us." "Kind," Catherine repeated with a knowing smile. "Is that what we're calling it? What else would you call it?" "I'd call it a man coming 20 miles each way every Sunday, rain or shine, supposedly to teach riding lessons to a woman who now rides better than most hands in the county." Put that way, it did seem significant. "Do you disapprove?" "Quite the opposite," Catherine replied. "Ethan Novak is worth 10 Boston gentlemen. I just wonder if you realize how serious his intentions are." "We haven't spoken of intentions," Bonnie protested, though her heart quickened at the thought. "Men like Ethan don't speak easily of such things, but they show them in other ways." Catherine set her mending aside. "He asked me, you know." "Asked you what? If I would object to his courting you properly?" Catherine smiled at Bonnie's startled expression. "The day he fixed the barn door weeks ago, said he wouldn't pursue you without my blessing, being your only family here." Bonnie stared at her sister, stunned. "What did you tell him?" "That you're a grown woman capable of making your own choices, but that he had my blessing if he could win yours." Catherine's expression grew serious. "I also told him you'd been hurt, that you came west to escape a man's unwanted attentions. He understood." "Is that why he's been so?" Bonnie searched for the word. "Respectful, partly. Mostly it's just who he is." Catherine picked up her mending again. "The question is, what will you do when he returns and finally speaks his piece?" Bonnie had no ready answer, but that night, lying in bed listening to the coyotes' distant calls, she found herself imagining a future she hadn't considered possible when she first arrived in Wyoming, one with a small ranch of her own, children with Ethan's blue eyes, and the freedom she'd discovered beneath the vast western sky. September brought cooler temperatures and news that the cattle drive was returning. Bonnie tried not to be obvious in her anticipation, but Catherine's knowing smiles told her she wasn't succeeding. The men returned on a Tuesday, dust-covered and weary but successful. Word reached Willow Creek that the prices in Cheyenne had been good, and Catherine's small herd had sold well. The next day, Marcus Henderson himself rode over with their earnings more money than they'd expected. "Your cattle were prime, Mrs. Taylor," the rancher said, accepting coffee at their kitchen table. "Brought top dollar." "Thanks in part to your hands helping us manage the herd," Catherine acknowledged. "Please thank them all, especially Mr. Novak. His advice on feed last winter made all the difference." Marcus nodded. "Ethan's got a good head for cattle. That's why I've promoted him to foreman starting next month. Jenkins is retiring, heading back east to his daughter's place." Bonnie, placing pie on the table, nearly dropped the plate. "Foreman, that's wonderful news." "Man's earned it," Marcus agreed. "Between us, he's been saving to buy land. Few more years as foreman, he might have enough for a decent spread." After Marcus left, Catherine turned to Bonnie with raised eyebrows. "Well, foreman of Double Cross is no small position. Comes with the foreman's cabin too, I'd wager." "Why are you looking at me like that?" Bonnie asked, though she knew perfectly well. "Because a foreman can support a wife, sister dear, and that cabin has stood empty since old Jenkins's wife died 3 years back." Bonnie busied herself with clearing dishes. "You're getting ahead of yourself." "Am I?" Catherine smiled. "We'll see on Sunday, I suppose." Sunday dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Bonnie spent extra time on her appearance, selecting a dress the color of summer sage that Catherine insisted brought out her eyes. Her hair, usually braided for practicality, she wore loose around her shoulders, the way it had been that first night at the depot. Ethan arrived earlier than usual, Buck freshly groomed and his own appearance more polished than Bonnie had ever seen it. He'd trimmed his hair and beard and wore a clean shirt under a vest she hadn't seen before. "Welcome back," Bonnie greeted him, suddenly shy despite weeks of anticipation. "Catherine told me the drive was successful." "Very," he agreed, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look beautiful, Bonnie." The compliment, direct and unadorned, brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Catherine, emerging from the barn, called out, "Don't you two want to go riding? Perfect day for it." The suggestion was transparent, but Bonnie was grateful for it. On horseback, away from the ranch, they might find the privacy to say what needed saying. They rode in companionable silence until they reached a grassy knoll overlooking the valley. Dismounting, they let the horses graze while they sat beneath a lone cottonwood tree, its leaves beginning to turn gold. "I miss this," Ethan said finally, gesturing to the landscape. "On the drive. Missed Sunday lessons." "As did I," Bonnie admitted. "The ranch felt different without your visits." Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Marcus Henderson made me foreman, Catherine told me. Congratulations, you've earned it. Comes with better pay and housing." He plucked a stem of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "It's a step toward what I've been working for." "Your own ranch," he nodded. "Been saving every penny. Another 3-4 years I could have enough for a small spread. Nothing fancy but good water, decent grazing." "That's a fine ambition," Bonnie said softly, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Ethan turned to face her directly. "Thing is, I've been thinking it might be lonely. A ranch needs more than one person to run it properly." Bonnie's heart quickened. "Catherine and I have managed." "Barely," he pointed out with a slight smile. "And you work twice as hard as you should have to." "What are you suggesting, Ethan?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I'm suggesting hoping that you might consider a partnership. With me. A business partnership." She asked, needing to hear him say the words plainly. His blue eyes held her steadily. "A life partnership, Bonnie Taylor. I'm asking if you might someday consider becoming my wife." Though she'd been anticipating this moment for weeks, the reality of it, his earnest expression, the warmth of his hand around hers, the perfect beauty of the Wyoming autumn day left her momentarily speechless. Ethan misinterpreted her silence. "I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a few months, and I can't offer much yet, just a foreman's cabin and the promise of hard work. But I swear to you," Bonnie placed her fingers gently against his lips, stopping his words. "You rescued me from that depot and showed me the way home beneath the stars." "You've been showing me the way home ever since, Ethan." Hope dawned in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she confirmed, her heart full. "I would be honored to be your partner in ranch life and in all things." The kiss that followed was nothing like the brief, chaste one he'd given her before the cattle drive. This was a sealing of promises, tender yet passionate, speaking of a future they would build together. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Ethan pressed his forehead to hers. "I can't offer you Boston comforts." "I don't want them," Bonnie assured him. I want this life, the honest work, the open sky, and you beside me through it all." They rode back to Willow Creek hand in hand, leading their horses at a gentle walk, reluctant to end this perfect moment. Catherine was waiting on the porch, her knowing smile blooming into genuine delight when she saw their clasped hands and radiant expressions. "Well," she demanded, descending the steps to meet them. Ethan's arm slipped around Bonnie's waist. "Your sister has agreed to marry me." Catherine embraced them both. "Thank goodness. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get a declaration." Over a celebratory supper, they discussed practicalities. Ethan would move into the foreman's cabin at Double Cross next month. They would marry before winter set in, allowing Bonnie time to prepare and Ethan to establish himself in his new position. Catherine insisted the wedding take place at Willow Creek. "What about after?" she asked, pouring more coffee. "Bonnie can't ride 20 miles each way daily between here and Double Cross." "She'll live with me, of course," Ethan said. "The cabin's small but sound." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "And Willow Creek, I can't manage alone, especially once winter comes." Bonnie and Ethan exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed this yet, but the solution seemed obvious to both. "What if we combined our efforts?" Bonnie suggested. "Ethan will be at Double Cross during the day, but evenings and Sundays we could help here, and once Ethan has his own spread." "We'd want you with us," Ethan finished. 3 people can run a decent-sized ranch if they work smart." Catherine's expression softened. "You'd want an old widow underfoot." "You're hardly old," Bonnie protested. "And your family." "My only family until now." "Our family," Ethan corrected gently. "If you'll have me as a brother." Catherine blinked back sudden tears. "I believe I would like that very much." The wedding took place on the first Sunday in October, with the mountains wearing their autumn colors and the valley golden beneath a perfect blue sky. The ceremony was small but heartfelt, performed by the minister from St. George on Willow Creek's front porch. Catherine stood as Bonnie's witness, while Marcus Henderson stood for Ethan, proudly declaring that his new foreman was the finest horseman and most honest man in the territory. Bonnie wore her green dress, the one that matches Wyoming. Ethan had called it with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ethan wore a new shirt and the vest that had become her favorite, freshly polished boots completing his wedding finery. Their vows were simple but profound, promising partnership and devotion through the harsh Wyoming winters and the sweet, brief summers that would mark their lives together. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Ethan's kiss held all the promise of their shared future. The celebration afterward brought neighbors from miles around. Tables set on the lawn groaned with food contributed by every ranch and homestead. There was dancing to fiddle music, children playing tag between the adults' legs, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Ethan found Bonnie sitting on the porch steps, watching the festivities with contented exhaustion. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Novak?" he asked, offering his hand. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Home to Double Cross. For now," he agreed, helping her to her feet. "But someday our own land, our own place." They said their goodbyes, Bonnie embracing Catherine with promises to return in 2 days' time to help with the apple harvest. Their friends and neighbors formed an impromptu honor guard, cheering as Ethan lifted Bonnie onto Buck's back and swung up behind her. As they rode away from Willow Creek, Bonnie leaned back against her husband's chest, secure in his arms just as she had been that first night. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, brilliant in the clear mountain air. "Remember what you said to me that first night at the depot?" she asked. "That I'd see home before the stars do." His arms tightened around her. "I remember." "You were right," Bonnie said softly. though I didn't understand then what home would mean. Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. And what does it mean now? She turned in the saddle to meet his eyes, finding in them all the love and promise she could ever want. It means you, Ethan. It means us together beneath these stars. The years that followed proved both challenging and rewarding. Ethan excelled as Double Cross's foreman, earning the respect of every hand and the confidence of Marcus Henderson. Bonnie divided her time between their small cabin and helping Catherine at Willow Creek, the sisters maintaining their close bond, even as Bonnie built her new life with Ethan. Their first child, a son they named James after Catherine's late husband, arrived in the summer of 1880, bringing joy and a new dimension to their partnership. Bonnie discovered that motherhood in Wyoming was like everything else on the frontier, harder work than she'd imagined, but infinitely more rewarding. By the time their daughter Elizabeth was born 2 years later, Ethan had saved enough for a down payment on land. 500 acres adjoining Willow Creek became the foundation of Novak Ranch, with a small house built by neighbors in the tradition of frontier barn raisings. Catherine sold Willow Creek to them for a nominal sum, insisting that her share be considered Elizabeth's inheritance. The combined property gave them viable grazing for an expanding herd, and the original Willow Creek house became Catherine's domain, close enough for daily interaction, but allowing the young family their privacy. As the children grew, Bonnie used her teaching skills to establish a small school in their home, inviting neighboring ranch children to join her lessons. What began as practical necessity became a valued community resource, with parents bringing goods and labor in exchange for their children's education. Ethan's reputation as a cattleman and horse trainer spread throughout the territory. By 1890, Novak Ranch was known for producing some of the finest stock in Wyoming, and Ethan served on the Territorial Cattlemen's Association board, his writing skills honed through years of Sunday lessons, with Bonnie now serving him well in business correspondence. Through it all, the harsh winters when they worried about the cattle surviving, the dry summers when they watched the creek anxiously, the financial panics that threatened their livelihood, they faced each challenge together, the partnership they'd promised each other on their wedding day growing stronger with each passing year. On a warm September evening in 1898, 20 years after Bonnie had first arrived at St. George's Depot, she sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Ethan teach 14-year-old James to break a spirited colt. Elizabeth, now 16 and showing signs of becoming as strong-willed as her mother, sat beside Bonnie, sketching the scene with remarkable talent. Catherine joined them, moving more slowly these days but still sharp-eyed and determined. "Reminds me of your first riding lessons," she commented to Bonnie. "Though you were considerably older and more cautious." Bonnie smiled, remembering those Sunday lessons that had been about so much more than horsemanship. "I had an excellent teacher." "You both did," Catherine said softly. "Taught each other the most important lessons." Later, after the children had gone to bed and Catherine had retired to her quarters, Bonnie and Ethan walked hand in hand under a sky brilliant with stars. 20 years had added silver to his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes, but he still moved with the same fluid grace that had first caught her attention. "20 years ago tonight," Ethan said, stopping to gaze up at the constellations they'd taught their children to recognize. A stubborn Boston schoolteacher sat waiting in the St. George Depot, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. And a presumptuous cowboy told her he'd get her home before the stars came out, Bonnie finished, leaning against his shoulder. Ethan's arm circled her waist, a gesture as familiar now as breathing. "Best promise I ever made. Best promise you ever kept," she corrected, turning to face him. Though there have been many since. His kiss was gentle, filled with the comfortable intimacy of their years together, yet still capable of quickening her pulse. When they parted, his blue eyes, unchanged by time, held the same warmth they had on that first night. "Would you do it all again?" he asked. "Leave Boston, come west, marry a cowboy with nothing but dreams." Bonnie thought of the life they'd built, the ranch that now stretched as far as she could see, their children growing strong and capable in this land of challenge and beauty, the community they'd helped build around them. She thought of the difficult times, droughts and blizzards, illness and worry, and how facing them together had only deepened their bond. "In a heartbeat," she replied without hesitation. "Every moment, Ethan. I'd choose you and this life every time." Above them, the stars of Wyoming blazed in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had witnessed their first ride together, their wedding vows, the births of their children, and all the quiet, ordinary moments that had woven together to create a life far richer than either could have imagined that night at the depot. Ethan took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers, and together they walked toward the home they'd built, not just the house with its solid walls and welcoming lights, but the deeper home they'd created in each other's hearts, a shelter as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above them.